Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Our next guest is responsible for a study about energy innovation, subtitled So Crazy It Just Might Work. So let's delve into these latest developments and determine their prospects. Brendan Cooke is a policy analyst at the Natural Resource Centre of the Canada West Foundation. Welcome to the show, Brendan.
Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me.
So before we get into some of the details of some of these innovations, what were you looking for when you did this study?
Yeah, so our energy innovation brief, as we call it, is a roughly monthly newsletter that we send out to our subscriber base. It generally focuses on all aspects of energy innovation, a focus on Western Canada primarily. And really the goal behind it is to kind of act as a myth buster. There's a lot of ideas out there that there's not a lot of options for the energy transition, that some of our traditional energy sources can't be done sustainably. And so we try to go out and find interesting innovations that kind of bust those myths. And this one in particular, we had, as you mentioned, the title of "It's So Crazy It Just Might Work." So these are a little bit more on the novel side of things. A lot of things that are kind of in early development, but might end up providing some technology that becomes very useful in the future.
Again, just generically and generally, just to start off with, so are these innovations designed to do something in particular, get us to net zero, or increase productivity? Give us a sense of that.
Yeah, so they're all really based around clean energy development. So I'd say, yeah, in a broad prospect, the broad. they're all really meaning to get us to net zero in a wide variety of ways. They all have their own interesting applications. Yeah, I guess as we go through them, you'll see.
All right. Well, let's not lead our audience on any further. Let's get into some of these innovations. Can you describe some of the more hopeful innovations for our audience?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess maybe I'll start off with one around geothermal. So there is a company spinoff out of MIT that is looking to do some of the deepest geothermal that's ever been done. And so what they're trying to do is use a device that essentially emits very small millimeter microwaves to produce mass heating and rapid heating. And what they're going to do is essentially try to use this to vaporize rock. And so by doing that, they'll be able to reach depths of up to 20 kilometers, something that is much, much further than what traditional drilling equipment is able to do. And by doing that, they really open up the possibility for geothermal to be used anywhere in the world. So geothermal traditionally is very location dependent. If you don't have a hot geology, you're not going to be able to produce electricity from geothermal. But by doing this, by getting to those depths, they've really opened up the opportunity for it to be achievable anywhere in the world. And so what their end goal is, and this is in very early stages of development in a university laboratory still, but the end goal really would be to be able to apply this to existing fossil fuel plants and take the turbines that exist there and retrofit them to run off of a geothermal source instead of a fossil fuel source.
So just so I understand, so their technology is designed to drill through rock or to vaporize rock? How does that work exactly?
Yeah, to essentially drill through rock by vaporizing rock. So yeah, they will use these microwaves to superheat the rock, vaporize it, and be able to bore holes at depths that are previously unreachable.
And is there any byproduct that is concerning or scary about this?
Not that I found in my research. It doesn't appear that there's any, as you mentioned, dangerous byproducts or anything that should be of concern. That being said, they're doing very small scale studies right now, so I'm sure some of that will have to come out as they move into commercialization.
Right, and so they're at the stage of pre-commercialization, still working out some of the details.
That's right. Yeah, university laboratory still at this point.
We're going to continue our discussion with Brendan Cooke. He is a policy analyst at the Natural Resource Centre, Canada West Foundation. The subtitle of the report is "So Crazy It Just Might Work: How to help us get our clean energy needs for the future, I guess, is the real goal as we've discussed so far. We're going to take a short break for some messages. We'll be back after that break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Brendan Cooke. He is a policy analyst at the Canada West Foundation. Brendan, we just started with one example of one of these new innovations, so crazy it just might work. Can you give us another example?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll, since we just talked about geothermal, I'll take a bit of a different spin on how geothermal can be used. So there is a nightclub right now in Scotland who is trying to reduce their emissions for their facility, and their primary emissions are coming from the heating and cooling of the building. And so what they're trying to do is find a renewable way to provide heating and cooling. And they're trying to essentially harness the heat that is generated by people dancing on their dance floor. So if you've ever been in a busy bar, it gets quite warm with everybody moving around. So they are using a heat pump. Picture essentially how a refrigerator works to pull the hot air off the dance floor, thereby cooling it. Take that hot air and inject it underground into a series of boreholes that have been drilled below the club. So they're essentially using the geothermal space or the geology under the nightclub to provide a geothermal storage for the heat. And so what they're able to do is by using that heat pump, they cool the club when it's in use, store the heat underground, and then when heating is required for either hot water or for space heating within the facility, they can then take that heat that's been stored underground, bring it back up, and use it to heat the facility. And so by doing that, they expect to be able to remove, I believe, 3 of their boilers used to heat the facility at the moment, and reduce their carbon footprint by about 70%.
And is this in operation now, Brendan?
I believe so. Yeah.
Wow.
Early operation. So yeah, one of these, I guess, novel examples. It's not something that's obviously being used in a wide variety of applications at this point in time, but interesting when you get some local businesses that really adopt to the evolving technology.
And what are the applications? Basically, any building could be using this technology, I guess.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you need to be able to build that geological storage potential under the building. So there would be some barriers in certain locations, I'm sure. But really, yeah, it's about using heat pumps and using renewable energy to provide heating and cooling. And yeah, application in a wide variety of different building types.
Can you give us another example from your study?
Yeah, sure. So I guess departing from the topic of geothermal, we also looked at some research being done out of the UK on nuclear batteries, and they call them a nuclear diamond battery. And so what that is it's a battery that is based off of nuclear waste, essentially. So they take the radioactive material from the carbon and graphite blocks that are used in nuclear reactors, and they gasify that radioactive carbon and use it to create man-made diamonds. So essentially the same way that you would create a man-made diamond for jewelry, they're creating it out of radioactive material. And then when that diamond, or any man-made diamond, is in the presence of radioactive material, it is able to produce a small electric charge. And so by creating the diamond out of the radioactive material, they've increased efficiency drastically, and they're able to essentially harness the energy given off by that radioactive decay to produce electricity in a small battery. So the charge that's given off by the battery is quite small, but the lifetime of the battery is quite large. And so these batteries are expected to last for 28,000 years. So longer than human civilization. So really, I guess in terms of where these are expected to be utilized, it's in areas where you're not going to be able to go and replace or refuel a power source. So lots of high altitude or deep sea sensing equipment, applications for space, and in the medical industry as well, in terms of pacemakers, those sorts of things where a small charge is required for a long duration.
I would imagine one of the hurdles they've got to get over is the immediate human concern over radioactivity. Is that one of the issues?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes both ways on this one. In one aspect, it is a means of consuming some radioactive waste, and so there is a benefit there. On the other side, anytime you say nuclear, people are going to start to be concerned with the safety aspects, and I assume in terms of health applications, that's going to be a greater concern as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have part 3 of this interesting discussion with Brendan Cooke from the Canada West Foundation. We're going to take another brief break. So Crazy It Just Might Work is the title of his study, Really Interesting Innovations. Stay with us. We'll be back for another segment after these messages. Brendan, you gave us a few examples over the last few minutes. I just want to get your sense, since you've analyzed these, how will they possibly impact Canada?
Yeah, so I guess as I mentioned, the geothermal specifically in Canada, geothermal energy has been challenging, especially out in Western Canada and well, all across Canada, really. We don't have a typically hot geology that you find in a place like Iceland, where geothermal has been implemented widely. So really being able to access those depths where the thermal energy is higher, that would open up a new aspect of geothermal for Canada. That being said, a lot of these innovations are at very early stages, so applications within Canada or really anywhere are going to be limited for the time being. But I think something that's just important for all innovation and for these especially is that it's happening. And we're going to need a lot of different types of energy throughout this energy transition. There's not going to be one silver bullet that really fixes everything for us. And so I think it's important that these novel innovations, even though they may seem a little far out and, as we said, so crazy that maybe they just might work, whether it's them or it's something else, I think these innovations will lead to further developments in clean energy.
Now, I guess the $64 question or more would be, do they require tax dollars?
Yeah. So I think with any of this energy innovation and any of the clean tech that we're trying to develop in Canada, that's a big barrier, right? And so I think especially in these early stages, to get these technologies off the ground, they are going to require funding. Now, what that funding looks like, if it's government funding and it requires tax dollars, or whether it's private equity and you get some venture capitalists coming in to fund some of these ideas, either way works, but they definitely are a requirement of funding to get them off the ground.
Right. So they're kind of agnostic where the funding comes from, private sector, public sector, but in order to get to the next stage of development, they will need that.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the other aspect of it that's interesting, and we've touched on it a little bit, is, basically these are kind of transformative technologies that we want to get Canada to a new and better and more resilient economy. So is that the hope of a lot of these innovations?
Yeah, I think so. I think of these and of the less novel innovations that we've seen going on in Canada lately. There's been a lot of development around nuclear, around small modular reactors, a lot of hydrogen innovation, especially out in Alberta and BC. And I think, yeah, that the goal of all of these energy innovations right now, whether it's reducing emissions directly through carbon capture or finding new energy sources that are lower emitting by their very nature, it's all around getting us to that cleaner economy and really attracting investment.
And do you see, when you look across a lot of these innovations, you talked about different sort of segments, obviously nuclear and geothermal as the two examples you cited. Are there some commonalities? Is there something that ties these innovations together that is kind of an interesting sort of byproduct of this, or are they kind of all over the place?
I guess a little all over the place in terms of the technology that they're applying. But I think, yeah, the common string through all of this is that clean energy string. So whether it's individual companies or governments around the world, a lot of these ambitious climate goals are being implemented, and a lot of this clean tech development is really just trying to get us there. So yeah, all sorts of different technologies being used, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's geothermal, solar and wind. We've got interesting innovation happening in all these different sectors. The primary goal at the end of the day is really to produce some reliable, clean electricity.
Do you think that in doing so, they're going to approach the Canadian government for funding? Is that one of the possibilities?
These technologies specifically, I would imagine, mostly just because of where they're being developed, whether it's in the US or in the EU. But I think what we have in Canada right now is fostering that innovation to some extent. There is a lot of clean energy funding that's come out. There's some promising funding coming out of the budget this year for carbon capture, for transmission development on the electricity side of things. Lots of EV funding coming out. So
Right.
We're on the right track. We're in terms of funding and getting these things built.
We're going to take another short break. We'll be back with our guest. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Brendan Cooke of the Canada West Foundation, talking about innovation so crazy they just might work. I want to return, Brendan, just to funding. Obviously, private sector dollars. We do have an ecosystem in this country for venture capital, for private sector dollars chasing some of these ideas and innovations. What's your sense? I mean, is that a possibility for some of these? I know you mentioned that they're in the U.S., they're in Europe. Is there a better place than Canada for these private sector dollars, or how do we stack up?
Yeah, in terms of private sector, I'm not totally sure in terms of where the best location for some of these would be. I think one thing to think about for funding for a lot of the clean tech, though, in terms of public sector funding, is what's just recently happened in the U.S.
Right.
With their Inflation Reduction Act, and so that has brought into the ecosystem of clean energy a lot of public funding. But a lot of public funding for U.S. projects. And so I think in terms of how we attract investment to Canada, that is now going to be a major consideration where some of this funding was kind of lacking in the U.S. previously. They've put a lot of carrots into the market to really bring investment into the U.S. And so I think in terms of government funding, the Canadian government does need to start looking at how we can ensure that we do retain the investment that we already have and how we can attract more into the sector.
Because that's one of the concerns, right? That it's been frequently the case that Canadian innovators have started in Canada, tried to get funding, private sector, public sector. Funding doesn't exist except maybe a U.S. investor who entices them to Silicon Valley or Boston or wherever, right? That's one of the issues that we faced.
Yeah, it is an issue, and now we're seeing it on the public side as well with this Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of it, I know you had some folks on recently talking about carbon capture, and some of the incentives that they're offering in the U.S. now are very clear and very straightforward. They're quite lucrative cash incentives essentially for carbon capture and for sequestering carbon. And our regulatory landscape's just a little more complex. And so we could see some difficulties in attracting that investment into Canada. And that's an area specifically where we really have an advantage. And we've been working in that area for a long time. And so I think there's some work to be done to make sure that we maintain that advantage.
Last question for you, or perhaps the last question. Obviously, you're surveying the whole space here, not just some of these more outlying innovations. Are there some less crazy ideas that you're following as well?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned a little earlier, that nuclear is a really interesting space right now in Canada. We have quite a clean electricity grid nationwide, but it differs greatly from province to province. And so in our provinces with less hydro resources, specifically Alberta and Saskatchewan, we really do need to look for some stable ways to provide that base load of power, zero emission power that is easily achieved in some of the other provinces. And so I think nuclear is a good way to do that. We've seen a lot of action from governments, both provincial and federal, in terms of supporting the development of specifically small nuclear reactors, and some interesting projects that have cropped up in the past little while as well. So out at Darlington Nuclear Station in Ontario, their construction is underway for what will be Canada's first small nuclear reactor. And there's been some agreements signed in Alberta and in Saskatchewan as well to bring that technology to those provinces. Different technology across the different provinces. Some are solid state reactors, some are water reactors. So yeah, it's an interesting space. There's a lot going on, and I think in terms of this clean energy transition, and specifically a clean electrical grid, nuclear has a lot of potential within Canada.
Well, there you have it, Brendan Cooke. I want to thank you again for appearing on the program. Very interesting innovations that you're covering. Best of luck with your research.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Some very interesting innovations there, as mentioned by Brendan Cooke of the Canada West Foundation, really at the forefront of some interesting ideas that could make sure that we have more clean energy solutions for us. Thanks for watching today. I'm sure we'll have another interesting program for you next time.